Despite the fact that we have this mounting evidence about the environmental and health risks linked to the use of synthetics, the fashion brands keep increasing their reliance on them. Synthetics, especially polyester, has become really the driving force behind fast fashion, a lot of low quality clothing, and that is because polyester is cheap. It costs half as much per kilo as cotton, and it allows brands to produce vast amounts of low quality disposable fashion. We are currently at the stage where already almost 70% of all our textiles are made from synthetics, which essentially means that majority of what we wear is made from fossil fuels.
The fashion industry is so unregulated. These problems just keep growing, and we all know that fashion is one of the biggest polluters. And there are often so many, I feel like, small brands or initiatives or things popping up where you're like, oh, we're moving in the right direction. But what does it really take to make things happen on a wider scale? Welcome to another episode of In Focus. My name is Lisa Marie Busbach, Creative Director at Fair Planet. And today we will be taking a closer look at fashion's plastic paralysis, the latest report on fashion's addiction to synthetic fibers, published September 2024 by the Changing Markets Foundation. It shows how major international fashion brands, some of which you might not expect, are increasingly relying on synthetic fibers, with most either ramping up their usage or concealing the true scale of their dependency. I'm very excited to be joined here today by Urska Trunk, Senior Campaign Manager at the Changing Markets Foundation, to dive into the report's key findings, including the tactics some of these brands use to avoid real accountability and also the urgent need for tougher regulations. Thank you so much for being here, Urska, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
To start off, could you briefly introduce the Changing Markets Foundation and its mission?
Sure. So Changing Markets Foundation is an environmental organization, and we're focused on calling out irresponsible corporate practices and greenwashing. We work on several different sectors where we see that better, more sustainable solutions are already available on the market, but unfortunately, the industry often chooses profit over planet. So, our mission is to really push the industry to embrace more sustainable strategies, and we do this in partnership with other NGOs, researchers, investigative journalists, and so forth. And one of our core campaigns actually has been in the fashion sector, where we've been calling for a much needed change in the industry to move away from their reliance on fossil fuel based textiles.
Yeah, thank you. And with this specific report, what were some of the key findings?
Yeah, with this report, we really took a deep dive into the relationship between fashion brands and plastic based materials. So, we're talking here about synthetic fibers such as polyester, nylon, acrylic, which are made from fossil fuels. And the findings were quite alarming, because what we found was that despite the fact that we have this mounting evidence about the environmental and health risks linked to the use of synthetics, the fashion brands keep increasing their reliance on them. And not only that, they continue to downplay the impacts of synthetics, and even resort to greenwashing. Now, why is it even problematic that fashion brands are using so much synthetics? First of all, it's because synthetics are really a major source of microplastic pollution. So when we wear synthetic clothes, when we wash them, when we throw them away, they shed these tiny particles that end up in our environment, in our food, and even in our bodies. And in fact, 35% of all microplastics found in the ocean today come from textiles, but they are also found in human kidneys, stomachs, placentas, and even the brain. So it's not just an environmental issue, it's becoming a health risk.
Hmm.
And then, secondly, it's because synthetics, especially polyester, has become really the driving force behind fast fashion. The the model that we know today, of producing a lot of low quality clothing, and that is because polyester is cheap. It costs half as much per kilo as cotton, and it allows brands to produce vast amounts of low quality disposable fashion. So we are currently at the stage where already almost 70% of all our textiles are made from synthetics, which essentially means that majority of what we wear is made from fossil fuels.
Wow, that's really shocking. I could imagine that it wasn't so easy, maybe, to obtain answers from these brands, like opening up about their use of synthetic fibers. So, you were one of the authors in the report. What was your role in this investigation, and what were the main challenges you encountered during the research process?
Yes. So my role was firstly to design and run a survey that targeted 50 of some of the biggest fashion brands. We basically asked them to disclose crucial information about how much synthetics they use, what are their policies to deal with microplastic pollution, and where do they stand on the upcoming legislation. And then we backed up these survey results with publicly available information in order to get a fuller picture on where the industry stands. And we created categorization or ranking, if you will, based on how well different brands performed. Now, one of the most biggest challenge continuously is the sheer lack of transparency in this industry. Getting complete and honest answers from brands is not easy. And even though we have been calling for transparency for over a decade now, in 2024, we found that fashion brands are still not disclosing the most basic information, such as how much synthetics do you use? For example, only 16 out of 50 brands disclose the volumes of synthetics they use in their production. So, yeah, this can really be seen as a tactic to avoid, accountability and scrutiny by consumers, environmental groups, but also journalists and regulators. So that is a continuous challenge that we're facing.
Hmm. Um, I was also shocked. You mentioned that you sent out this questionnaire, like a survey, and it's difficult to get transparency. But I was shocked to see, for example, Patagonia on that list of brands that use a lot of synthetic fibers, given their positive environmental reputation. Can you share your thoughts on their approach, particularly their sale of microplastic filters for washing machine? I remember seeing that in a store once, and I was like, "Oh, that's great! That's solving the
Mhm.
problem." But
Yeah.
probably not.
I mean, yes, I understand. Patagonia has really built, a reputation for being one of the sustainability leaders in the sector. The reason we put Patagonia in the red zone, so the lowest ranking, was because of lack of transparency. Not only did they not respond to any of the questions in our survey, but they also do not disclose any of this basic information publicly, meaning how much synthetics do they use in terms of volumes or percentages. And that is problematic because, as I mentioned, with this you can avoid accountability, but also it can open the door to misleading claims, so greenwashing. They do publicly disclose some strategies on dealing with microplastics. There's a wide range of them, and one of them is recommending consumers to use wash bags, guppy friend wash bags, to capture microfibers. And this is a bit of a controversial solution because not does it only shift the responsibility to consumer to deal with this
Yeah.
problem, but also they're kind of monetizing the solution to a problem that they have partly created, that the industry has created. And don't get me wrong, they're not the only ones. And I'm sure in a way, yes, you are capturing microplastics, but what they also propose is that once you capture that, you dispose this in the trash. So is this really dealing with the microplastic problem, or you're only shifting it? So instead of it flowing down the drain to our waterways, it's being it's ending up in our landfills or incinerated. But on a good, the good side, they do have wider strategy that involves research development, and they are also one of the brands that stands out in framing their reuse platform as a way to avoid further production. So this is one of the core solutions to the problem, to deal with the overproduction and extending the life span of our clothes. But yeah, we were sad to see that they do not make any commitments to reduce their use of synthetics.
Hmm, very interesting. What were some other key indicators that you used to assess brands' plastic pollution? And on the brighter side, which were some companies that stood out for their low use of synthetic fiber or commitment to reducing them
Mhm.
since your last surveys in 2021 and 2022? Have any
Mhm.
brands made a significant progress there?
They did, yes. And the way we categorize brands in these four categories is by looking at how much synthetics they use, what is their level of transparency about it, and also whether they are making any kind of commitments to phase down and phase out synthetics. And two brands are kind of leading the charge and have made commitments to phase out synthetics before 2030. These are Reformation and Hugo Boss. So it is a start. And we had only three brands that reported decrease in the use of synthetics since our last survey. These were Mango, G-Star Raw, and New Look. While on the negative side, half of the brands that responded actually admitted that they have ramped up their production of their use of synthetics.
Simply because also, I guess, of that massive overproduction problem. I mean, it's a problem in the fashion industry in general, and then with this kind of fiber, it's just very
Exactly.
detrimental.
Yes.
You also mention in the report tactics like downcycling plastic bottles into clothes, um, basically recycled polyester. Why is this solution not as sustainable as it's often portrayed,
Mhm.
and not an effective long-term solution, maybe? Because we see it everywhere now in so much activewear, swimwear, etc. as well.
No, for sure. Everywhere you go shopping on high street or online, you will see,
Yeah.
recycled polyester clothes advertised, and it's definitely one of the biggest sustainability strategies by brands, but it's also one of the biggest greenwashing strategies because like you mentioned, almost all of recycled polyester today, 98%, is not made from old clothes. It's made from using plastic bottles. And we already have systems in place where bottles can be recycled back to bottles continuously. So if you're making clothes out of it, you're not only breaking that recycling loop, but also the clothes made from plastic bottles cannot be recycled back to this high quality polyester clothing because we have limitations in
Mm.
recycling technology. So they're way more prone to end up on landfill or incinerated. And secondly, also, this is no solution to the microplastic problem. Whether you're wearing a virgin polyester shirt or recycled polyester shirt, they shed microplastics. So it does nothing to solve this problem. But we found that 82% of brands in our survey are leaning towards this approach as a solution to the plastic problem.
Wow. On the other hand, then, what are some efficient and more authentic strategies that brands could adopt or are implementing already? Maybe you found some in your survey to reduce the overproduction and move towards a more sustainable practice.
Mhm. Yes, what we have found out through years of research into this sector is that fast fashion, so the model that we really want to tackle here, thrives on the use of synthetics. There's really a very clear correlation between the rise of polyester in the past 20 years and the explosion of cheap, low quality clothing that then leads to the waste, to the pollution, to ongoing reliance on fossil fuels. So, in order to really address this and put fast fashion out of fashion, um, fashion brands should adopt some of the first steps, including making clear and time bound commitments to phase down their use of synthetics, and prioritizing removing synthetics from collection for pregnant women and children, because science shows that those are the demographics that are most vulnerable to the exposure to microplastics. They should also start investing in true circularity. So, fiber to fiber technologies, making new clothes from old clothes, not clothes from bottles.
Hmm.
They should also be more transparent. I mean, it's 2024. It's time that brands disclose where their clothes are made, how they're made, what fibers are used. And then, lastly, and I would say this is really important currently, is to openly support progressive legislation in the sector that tackles the circularity, the sustainability, the production, such as the upcoming EU legislation. Yeah, these are just some first steps, but if employed widely, can have a big impact.
What is needed to employ them widely, these measures and maybe policies, etc.? Because I feel like, yeah, the fashion industry is so unregulated, and just these problems just keep growing. And we all know that fashion is one of the biggest polluters. Um, and there are often so many, I feel like, small brands or initiatives or things popping up where you're like, oh, we're moving in the right direction. But what does it really take to actually make things happen on a wider scale?
Mhm. Yes, you're completely right. It has been one of the most unregulated sectors. And what our research shows is that, brands will not make substantial changes based on their voluntary commitment scheme certification and so forth. What we really need right now is for regulators to step in and introduce legislation in this sector. Otherwise, we will continue as business as usual. But the good thing is that we're really currently at this crossroad, where governments around the world are for the first time starting to legislate, to introduce legislation.
Mhm.
And for example, the EU is really, yeah, I would say, like, leading the way on this, because it's currently proposing and developing already legislation on everything from eco design, so the fact that producers need to consider environment in the design of the clothes, on the waste management, meaning that producers and brands will be responsible for the products they put on the market and will need to pay for their repair, their reuse, recycling, disposal, or so forth. In line with the polluter paid principle, there will be rules about what kind of claims they can make about how green, environmentally friendly their clothes are, so we can put an end to greenwashing. And there's more legislation coming. But what I want to say is that all of these will be developed in this coming years. So the stakes are really high. And what is really important is that they are ambitious, because if they are, they can really change the game in this sector. But it's obvious, if we rely on voluntary commitments, we will not get far.
That was actually basically already my last question. The statutes of EU legislations, which you basically just touched on, were there any issues your report identified, though, in their implementation and phrasing? Maybe if you have seen EU legislations on the topic already, or is that too early to assess?
I would say that, the EU textile strategy that came out in 2022, it kind of set the basis for all of this upcoming legislation, was very, yeah, it was very optimistic or progressive, in a way that it also recognized the link between synthetics and fast fashion, and the fact that, for example, making clothes from bottles is not a sustainable solution, and that synthetics are a huge source of microplastics and need to be addressed. What we're missing from these upcoming legislative developments is the acknowledgement of that synthetics are a problem and they need a specific special focus. So this is a big gap that I hope that legislator will address, because the danger is that if polyester or recycled polyester gets continuously recognized as a sustainable fiber, then it means that fast fashion will be recognized as a sustainable way forward.
Mm.
It will just give momentum to brands like Shein, that 82% of their garments are made from synthetics, and so forth. So not much will change. So I really hope that legislators will recognize this as they did in the EU textile strategy.
Hmm. And do you think there are any, or have you found that there are any really feasible alternatives to polyester? Very
Um,
broad question, but
Yes, I mean, currently there's always technological developments, but the way we see it currently, no. I mean, even the recycling doesn't really exist. Less than 1% of our textiles is recycled, and here also the point is not to substitute, polyester with another fiber. What we really need is a slowdown of fashion as we know it. Like I said, there's obvious overproduction of low quality cheap clothing, and it's also something that I don't think us consumers want. This we would prefer to have high quality clothing that lasts, that we can wear for a long time. Instead of cheap clothing, you buy cheap, you buy twice. You're not actually saving money on the long term. So in terms of yeah, consumer wants, environment, and also not to go into the human rights and social impacts in the fast fashion supply chain, it's clear that the model needs to change.
yeah, thank you. And looking forward, like with that report out now, first of all, what are you doing now to have this heard in as many places as possible and kind of create a wave of change? But also, what's next? What are you working on in the fashion sphere? Are there any more investigations coming? Or yeah, what's the status on that?
hmm I mean, the aim of these reports and all the reports we've done so far is to, present industry data, because, as I said, there's just such lack of transparency. And in order to have strong legislation, we need to know where the industry actually stands. Because if we're just looking at the commitments, we're going to think there's real change happening. So, yes, the idea is to get this in front of as many stakeholders, including legislators in the EU, but also broadly, going forward, in order to basically address this problem of microplastics pollution. We need to address this at the source. So reduce our reliance on plastic-based materials. So we do plan to continue doing more research on the industry, also investigations in this area, in order to bring this uh, to awareness. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was already it from my side. That was really interesting. I'm pretty sure our readers and listeners are gonna be quite surprised by some of the facts. I'm also gonna link the report in our description. And yeah, thank you for your time and thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you very much.